hangga't buhay pa naman ako, pwedeng baguhin yan. Hindi naman natatapos talaga yan.
Oo.
Tapos, parang ganun din sa buhay. Lahat ng maraming ibang bagay. Diba? May mali, itatama mo sa susunod. O kaya, gagawa mo ng bago. Sabi nga nito, ganun din yung prinsipyo na impetus siya para magsulat pa. Impetus siya para, kunwari may bagong tula, impetus siya para bumuo ng isa pa.
Okay. Naintriga ako doon, Kael. Pwede ko bang balikan yun? Yung may reading, tapos then and there, nangyari yun na you rewrote it and then you read the revised.
Hindi naman total rewrite, ma'am. Hindi naman total rewrite. Para may isang linya or line cut na ano. So, gagawin ko, isa-slash ko doon. Tapos, hindi lang nangyari yun, pero laging nangyayari. Parang never pa ako sumampa na sa isang reading na hindi ako until the last minute, diba? Nagtutweak ako ng mga linya bago sumampa. Parang, ano siya, tanggap ko na ganun talaga yung buhay ng tula na ganun talaga yung buhay ng maraming buhay yung isang tula talaga.
How fascinating. So, reading it with fresh eyes, a different kind of context for that particular day.
Experiences, right?
Glenn, are you your own worst critic? Do you find that that there is that niggling voice sometimes na parang dapat ganun?
Kasi but also kasi I'm Aquarius. So I'm okay with
bigla tayo nagkaroon ng signs, okay?
Kasi I'm similar with Kael and Dom. Parang of course there are things you wanted to, not really correct but change, Pero I think there's also value in looking at the book as a record of your writing, your thoughts at a particular time. For all its errors, for all its shortcomings, etc. Typos are different kasi after every
naiinis ba kayo sa typos? Naiinis ba kayo?
Minsan. Pero I don't, for instance, the prose in my prose in that book, hindi ko na siya type masyado ngayon, pero that's why in my current project, iniiba ko siya. So parang ganun nga din na it's an impetus to do something else, pero it's worth but yun nga, there's value in looking at it as a record of yourself at like one particular point in your life.
Nice. So going to that topic naman of the impetus to write again, to keep writing, to keep at it. What is the next project? Is there something brewing? Are you in the middle of something? Are you finishing something? Dom, sige, let's start with you. Is there a next project or are you in the middle of it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think there will always be a next project. I guess, how do I describe? Well, I mean, just to give an idea, it's in the most vague sense possible because it's still being done.
Okay.
Like a crime.
No spoilers.
Half crime, half horror book set in the 1930s. That's the idea. So, but actually, which means the pandemic is making it harder to do the research that's needed. So, but I already have quite a lot of the material gathered, so it's it'll get there.
Okay, all right.
But yeah, I mean, it's always a project.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Kael, what's the next project?
Well, actually, may katatapos lang na isa. Hindi nabanggit kayo sa bayan, at labas din ng Ateneo Press yung translation ko nung libro ni Dr. Leloy Claudio, yung Jose Rizal, Liberalismo at ang Balintunan ng Kolonyalidad. Originally published abroad ni Leloy yon, and then nakuha namin, napagbigyan kami to publish it, nakakuha ng grant to translate, and then with the help of Friedrich Naumann Foundation. So nilabas ng partnership siya, nilabas siya ng Ateneo Press. So lumabas last year and available na siya. Baka pa-plug na lang din. Ang title ng libro, Jose Rizal, Liberalismo at ang Balintunan ng Kolonyalidad. Isa siyang intellectual history ni Rizal, intellectual biography ni Rizal. At binanggit ko yon dahil in the process of that, nung pagta-translate, hindi ko alam pero parang may na-unlock din. Ang nangyayari siguro because intensive yun dahil tight deadline, intensive, nagsusulat ka and for really long days at a time, several hours per stretch, ang iniisip mo lang language kasi translation
Yeah, right,
so
right,
language
right.
in terms of language lang iniisip mo parang di ba, formal equivalence, dynamic equivalence, ano yung eksaktong salita. And through that process, nagulat ako kasi dapat pagod ka na kasi buong araw ka nagtatranslate, nakatambay ka sa kung saan. Pero minsan magmamaneho ka pa uwi, may mako-compose, nangyari sa akin, nagmamaneho pa uwi, may mako-compose na tula, halos buo na sa isip ko. And I thought that translation process helped a lot. So dahil doon ang dami nasulat, well, I wrote more Filipino poems during that stretch than I have for the last several years. So ngayon, parang naging iniisip ko, dumadami rin, nagkukumpul-kumpul na yung mga tula in Filipino. So yun yung next big project sa isip ko na siguro tama panahon na i-compile ito, tingnan ko ano yung mga thematic thread, gawa ng diba, gawa ng magandang sequence, maayos sa sequence, tingnan yung emotional contour. At yun yung translation ng libro ni Dr. Claudio, and then ang target ko makapaglabas soon or matapos yung manuscript soon ng Filipino collection of Filipino poems in Filipino.
Nice. Ramdam na ramdam ko yung excitement. Totoo. Glenn, ikaw.
And then ako, I just finished my second, hopefully my second book kasi I'm in a creative writing program, so that's my thesis. So that's also part of the motivation to like do a PhD kasi it will give you the chance to the opportunity to write a thing. So yeah, so it's done. It kind of reimagines the capture of Jovito Palparan in 2013. So it's set, pero I transplant that to early 2000s. The 2000s, the Arroyo regime, the spate of political killings, etc. So that's the milieu of that project. And then after that, I plan to switch to Tagalog kasi
Kasi parang bitin.
Kasi I decided I'm more interested in talking to more people, no? Kasi when you write in English, you already exclude certain demographic, no? So yeah.
If you will, so I'm looking at this as my field of research is in multilingualism. I'm a language scholar and I am fascinated by topics that have to do with our multilingual nature, whether in literature or in teaching. And your love affair with language, as it were, diba? As a writer, diba? Yung sinabi ni Kael kanina na panahon na para magsulat ng para ibuo yung mga tula sa Filipino and then writing in Filipino and all that. How much of that informs, inspires, motivates your writing life that you are able to shuttle between and among the languages that you have, that you know, and use vibrantly in your personal lives as well as in your writing life?
I think Filipinos take it for granted that we navigate these worlds tapos mostly seamlessly, no? For non-Tagalogs, even 3 languages, no? Kasi if they know the local language, tapos Filipino, tapos English, no? Ako, medyo nahihirapan ako. Kasi, yun nga, well, nahihirapan in one sense kasi one language would intrude when you're writing in English, tapos, especially, napapansin ko na medyo, hindi ko alam kung microaggression from my Australian supervisors na they would notice something peculiar about my language, no, and my English, no,
which your grammar, the word choice,
the syntax, and I've always thought that as a strength, no, kasi yun nga, no, kasi English is not for me, English is not my first language, so I look at it, medyo laging confused or laging ambivalent yung tingin ko sa English, no, so I think that's unnecessary position, especially when you consider our context or historical context, what the role of English in our lives, etc. So tapos parang happy naman yun kasi you pick up ideas from all these languages that you know. Yeah.
Yes. Right. Thanks for that, Glenn. Ikaw, Kael, that sense of ambivalence, that sense of Is there conflict? Is there an embrace of it? Is there, your love affair with the multilingual nature as writer? Yeah.
Much like kay Glenn, parang a lot of times I really just take it for granted. Parang ako, kasalanan ko yun really. Di ba? I might need to be a bit more reflective about it at umupo talaga pag-isipan yung ganitong klaseng consciousness. Ano? And sa totoo lang, di ba, nung 07, 08, yung dalawang palang ka mag-fight language, tapos parang yung mga tao, parang paano mo ginagawa yun? Paano mo ginagawa yun? Parang, di ba, ganyang makakatula ka ng ganyan. Tapos parang, hindi ko alam eh. Hindi ko naman talaga, siguro, ano siya eh, bunga rin siya ng pagka-hybrid natin. Hybrid yung kultura na.
Right.
Sa akin, lumaki ko na ganun yung buhay. Lumaki ko na, di ba, magbabasa ka ng works in English, manonood ka sa TV na, di ba, galing sa halip yung pinapanood mo, yung mga sine mo. So, naging natural. One thing na naging mas conscious ako over the years is that nung una may divide siya kapag susulat ako ng tula, kailangan ganitong classic wika, or English or Filipino, tapos dinedefine na yun simula pa lang ganyan. Pero lately, even in my other work, even in the kumbaga sa mga tasks na kailangan kong magsulat, parang tinatanggap ko na sa isip ko isa lang naman talaga siya. 'Di ba? Parang may isang tool lang ng wika.
Yes.
And then I just and then I just choose yung I just choose the lines or the words that most authentically reflect what I'm feeling, most authentically reflect yung reflections ko, yung self-discoveries na yun. And then yun, sinusulat na lang ng ganun. Pero tama na kailangan siyang pag-isipan pa. I mean, hindi ganun kasimple to just write a poem tapos taglish siya kasi may effect yun dun sa reader mo expecting a poem in Filipino or a poem in English na yun lang yung babasahin. But yeah, siguro dun sa tanong mo, do you embrace it? Do you feel anxious about it? Mas dun ako sa I take it a bit for granted.
Okay.
And in such a manner that I probably am embracing it unconsciously.
Okay. Thanks. How fascinating. Dom, your take on that.
Okay,
the languages.
Now I can be the odd one out.
Okay.
No, because definitely, at least in my case, cannot take it for granted because I'm very much the stereotype of the English is my first language.
Okay.
It is the dominant part of my brain. As hard as I try to kick it out. My experience with Filipino, for example, is to exacerbate it a little bit. It was laughable until after college. But it's still a little laughable sometimes. Depends on the context. But I mean, but for example, right now, after I graduated from undergrad, I graduated from the English department. I work in the English department. But for my master's, I went to the Filipino department in UP. It was a very conscious choice. It was very much it was a personal choice. It was a political choice. It's a recognition of, you live in this community. There is an English-speaking community, and it isn't. You speak to the English-speaking community, of course, but it's a limited community, and the reach of that language is limited. And so you have to, if you are in a position to do so, if you have the privilege to do so, which I do, to take an extra effort to deepen your ability to communicate, ability to understand things, then you should do it. So like part of the reason I'm doing something in the 1930s, like I mentioned earlier, is because my research project now has been to analyze the Sakdalista archives. Basically, it's one of the first mass movements in the country from the 1930s. So I've been, for the last 2 years, I've basically the National Library has digitized it, and I've been turning it into a archive that you can process through computer software. So it's kind of a grueling process, but it's mostly Tagalog, and I have to write my thesis. I have to write about it in Tagalog as well. It is difficult. So now for me, it is, but it's something you do. I also and the whole thing is important. The learning of languages.
Yeah.
I used to know a little bit of Cebuano. It's mostly gone now. I can speak Indonesian. The whole thing is just, it's part of a larger process of, I think, realizing that it's part of your knowledge formation in a sense.
Right.
And your ability to access, your language access and your ability to access works, and your decision to read certain things changes the kind of, just even the way you imagine the world. And so it's important to go a step out and do it. Why now? It's just because the others have mentioned it. Am I trying to write something in Filipino? I have tried many times. I'll just leave it at that.
We wish you all the best in that process, Dom. Thanks for that. So, can you, something I picked up also on Dom's answer a while ago, on Dom's response, you have a privilege as a writer to impact people's lives with the languages that you choose to write in, the words that you choose to bring into the characters, the personas, the voices in your works. And going back to that topic by Roy about how literature is portal, gateway to this world and the next. How do you see your work playing that, or positioning its role in the times today? We can say as times of helplessness, a time of unpredictability, uncertainty. Where do you find your work during these times? Bigla tayo. What kind of pause is that? So that portal to one world to the next, and you as writer, I think we assert that there is privilege in that, in by the works that you have published and how it can impact people's lives. When you think about the times today, how does your work do that? Umpisa tayo kay Kael naman. Kasi si Gledja kasi Dom laging nagawa. Sige, Kael.
Kaya ko habaan para makapag-isip tayo. Biglang propon, nagkukwentuhan lang tayo. Naman, sige. May binanggit ka yung idea na privilege nga siya. Una, hindi ko alam kung gaano karaming Pilipino nagbabasa ng tula. Lalo pa yung kung gaano karaming Pilipino nagbabasa ng English na tula. Pero doon sa idea nga na, oo, totoo parang may isang makabasa niyan, meron kang nahahawi in a sense yung buhay niya towards somewhere. And that is a privilege to be able to do that. And also that is a duty to be able to do that. And isa dun sa mga siguro iniisip ko lagi, dahil hindi ko alam kung ganun din sa lahat ng ibang writer, pero sa akin hindi dinidefine ng pagka-writer ko lang yung buhay ko. Hindi ako lumalabas tapos, di ba? Hindi ako ganun Hindi ganun yung lived experience ko. Talking about lived experience, what I try to do in my writing really is have it authentically reflect kung ano yung mga nararamdaman ko, ano yung mga iniisip ko, ano yung mga bagay na nag-e-empathize ako with, sino yung mga taong yun. And then I write those things. And kung kulang doon, I mean, di ba, parang may moral duty ka na dapat iniisip mo yung mambabasa mo in that sense, di ba? Kung may kulang doon, kung may mali doon sa mga sinusulat ko, feel ko, ang pagkukulang, hindi doon sa writing. Yung buhay ko mismo. Yung buhay ko mismo na authentically dapat nire-reflect ng writing. So, in a sense, what I try to do is, I try to, di ba, sinusubo kong maging makatao bilang totoong tao. Sinusubo akong mabuhay na, di ba, kumakapit doon sa mga paninindigan ko and everything. And then, I just let the poetry take care of itself. Uupo ka, and then itutulak mo lang yung totoong nararamdaman mo na in that sense. Dun sa I think yun yung paano ba? Yun yung isa dun sa pinaka unang tugon na pumasok sa isip ko nung binanggit mo yung passage nga ni Arundhati Roy, ano? It's that it allows us, literature, ang nagpapakita siya na nagbubuo siya ng connection sa pagitan mo at saka sa pagitan ng nagsusulat. Nagbubuo siya ng isang connection na driven by, I suppose, empathy yan eh. Empathy yun eh. Kasi ibang karanasan, tapos may sarili kang karanasan, tapos parang bigla mong marirealize na pinagsasaluhan natin itong mundo. Ganun siya. Ano pa ba yung pabuhay sa isang hindi? Yung mabuhay nang nare-realize mo na hindi ka nag-iisa in the sense na nagsasalo-salo tayo dito at may responsibilidad tayo sa isa't isa. So, ewan ko kung may sense yun. Pero yun yung take ko dun sa sinasabi.
Naintindihan ko naman.
Ayan guys, mahaba para meron kayong duelo.
Pasalamatan natin si Kaelsa. But yeah, wonderful. Wonderful. So, Dom, Glenn would like to chime in next. Sige.
I'll go next kasi baka makalimutan ko. I remember, interesting, no? Parang the early weeks of the lockdown and the pandemic, parang I personally sought out parang movies or novels that thematize the pandemic or a plague in some way, no? Okay. So, parang looking back, it was really out of restlessness. Na parang the pandemic was something new as a historical experience. So, parang I looked for parang documentation or proof na it has happened before, no? So it doesn't have to be parang you don't have to approach it from a position of helplessness. No? So parang ganun din yung kaya nga parang may parallel yung Arundhati Roy formulation of a pandemic being a portal to fiction or to literature. Na yun nga kasi they both work on the level of imagination as Kael kind of alluded to, no? Yung kasi when sabi din sa line niya na the task, so if we agree that the pandemic is a portal, parang the task is what lies after that or beyond that, on the other side of that, is reimagining the world. No, parang after it lays bare the horror and the terror of the world, no, the fissures in our system, the inadequacies in our systems, etc. The political task is to reimagine the world based on that or coming from that. So parang ganun din yung the operation of fiction also works on the level of consciousness. Kasi nga when you read something, parang there is always a tendency, I think, to sort of compare that to your own lived experience. Tapos yung mga similarities, the parallels, and also the differences and the overlaps and the slippages. That's when that's how you make sense of it. No, that's how my favorite thing that people say about my book is, you know, when they are forced to or when they are led to a reimagining of an otherwise ordinary experience. So parang ganun din yung I think, no. Pero yun at the same time, like Kael,
I get it.
I
like
hesitate.
that.
Yeah, like Kael, I kind of hesitate to overstate the role or the centrality of literature, especially given the material realities of the Philippines as a country. No, parang yun nga, no, how many people read books, etc. So parang there's also a danger when you are enamored dun sa ganung concept na I'm changing lives, na parang ganun, na parang we're doing something more than we probably are. No? Pero yeah.
Okay. Thanks for that. I like that. Fiction has a level of consciousness, you know? Reimagination. Dom, you've got a lot of time to think.
Really? Was that a lot of time? No. So I guess there are a couple of levels that you can talk about it. So let's start on a more personal level, for example, since the lead up to this discussion was issues of privilege, for example, and connecting to the idea of materiality. That there's a material reality behind this. Like it was very clear to me, for example, that even in a hypothetical, like, I mean, it's hard to even say what success means, right, in Philippine literature, but even in a hypothetical idea of a book, or that my book in particular being successful, let's say, successful to what? Who does it reach? Who can you actually speak to? And even as I was writing it, that was a very big, that it was in the back of my mind. So there was a lot of, and when I mean even as I was writing, I meant even as I write stories as a whole, there was a very, because of what I said earlier about my difficulties with language. So let's say at the moment I'm left with, I write in English, right? For various reasons. Not just that, but that's one of the reasons, right? And so if I write in English, like, who can I write to? Who do I, even hypothetically, who could read it? And so what kind of conversation is even possible? What kind of conversation is even possible? And what kind of conversation is important to have? And of course, and taking that, in order to figure that out, you have to take into account, again, who you can actually speak to as a, if you're writing in English, who are the usual readers for that? Which is so in my book, it ended up, not because I kind of planned it that way, but also because for each individual story that I was writing, that was a concern of mine. There was always a concern with trying to basically interrogate the typical ideas of the kind of middle class morality, middle class consciousness in the Philippines. A very liberal tendency that needs to be interrogated much more heavily than it has. And that was like a central overarching idea in the back of my mind, even as I was writing everything. Because it's like we can't assume we are making that much of a difference necessarily. Even in countries where literature plays a much more central role in culture and society, it is not the central role. It is crucial, but it's always secondary to other factors. And so then you look in the Philippines, where, I mean, in reality, a lot of people do read, right? A lot of people do read in the Philippines. It's just not the reading that probably the four of us here are thinking about in terms of reading. But there's a lot of writing being produced. In theory, if you think about it, literature, the way that literature has a kind of edge over other art forms, let's say other narrative art forms. Let's say look at film, look at comic books, look at video games, things like that. Literature is the easiest to produce. Sorry, not to write. It's the easiest to produce. It's the cheapest, really, to produce, which is why so many people do produce, for example, on Wattpad. So many people produce fan fiction, because the amount of material you need to produce it is much lower. The amount of the ability to access it is generally easier as well. At least access in terms of actually getting a copy, let's say, of something online. But there is a huge division. There's a huge division between that potential that literature has in terms of that field and kind of literature that gets talked about a lot in particular areas. This one, for example. Although there are other, like, at least in terms of this festival, right? There are other rooms where they're discussing romance, discussing things that get consumed more. Of course, those things aren't necessary. I'm not saying they're brilliant in the sense of that they don't also need to be interrogated. We all need to interrogate everything, but it's a problem that it's a big problem that you have to take into account, right? Yeah.
Okay,
but so one last thing. But in terms of at least just to finally connect it to that idea of literature as a portal, I think that really is, in general, where literature has an edge. Right? There's a reason why even if you don't think of reimagining the world, but you just think of the huge amount of narrative potential in science fiction, in films, etc. A lot of the great stuff gets they get sourced still in a very, very active literary community, because the way to enter it, the ability to produce is much easier. I think that's the challenge for us, is just to broaden that in the Philippines.
I have so many more questions, and I picked up so many other things that I wish we could start as conversations, but I have to open the floor to a question from our viewers, if that's all right. And one question was fielded in, and this is from, I have to wear my glasses, sorry. This is from Charlene Gonzalez. Going back to our point a while ago on anything that we'd like to revise during once the book or once the collection has been completed. She asks, how do we avoid such a situation that would lead us to think that we could have done better with the passages and the chapters? So Charlene asks that.
Can I answer?
Okay. Go ahead.
I have a short answer. I remember when I was dilly-dallying about my manuscript, trying to polish it. Someone told me, the manuscript can always be better. Yun. It can always infinitely be better. No, parang that's a state, it's a constant state. So, at a certain point, you have to stop and just put it out there, I think. Yeah.
Dagdag ako, kung maiksi lang din. Kasi yung tanong mismo, how do you avoid? Ang sagot dun, why avoid?
Yeah.
Diba? Kasi sa totoo lang, kailangan mong tanggapin.
Why avoid?
Why avoid?
Okay.
Tanggapin mo, ganun talaga yung ano.
Ganun talaga.
Yeah, I think if you try to avoid feeling bad about your writing, you will just not write.
Yeah.
It is unfortunately. Yeah. But, I mean, I think to make it, to spin it, at least to make it a little easier. I mean, I think if you figure out how to find meaning in the process itself. If you always
second guess, if you're always second guessing na, why avoid? Thanks for that, gentlemen.
But I think if you find a way to gain meaning from the process itself, it helps. You stop thinking about the outcome as much. You stop thinking about what other people are saying.
Dagdag ko din, eksaktong ganun. Kasi craft work yan eh. Tanong ng ano yan eh. Basically yung tanong ni Charlene is, paano magiging, di ba, magaling? paano yung ako aabot sa punto na maganda yung sinusulat ko lagi? Di ba? Tingin ko,
perfect. Good job.
Kaya ang part ng growth mindset kasi ng lahat ng kahit anong craft, karpintero ka o baker ka o manunulat ka, part nung kailangan mong magkaroon is a growth mindset na parang hindi ko talaga kayang abutin yung perfectong kaya kong abutin. Kaya kailangan kong matuto pa, kailangan kong galingan pa every time. Sa Jiu-Jitsu, may sinasabi, every time you step on the mats, ang goal mo, 1% better ka today than you were yesterday. So ganun din siguro yung you just get better at it by doing it and doing it over and over again. Kung yun yung tanong, tingin ko yun yung tanong eh. Parang craft work question siya eh. How do I get to that point?
Right. Charlene, I hope that set of answers has kind of allayed your OC tendencies. Yun. Well, friends, it's 11:58. Thank you very much for spending time with us and sharing your work and sharing your insights on the work that you've done, on the work that you continue to do. For our viewers, on behalf of National Bookstore and Ateneo de Manila University Press, we want to thank all of you for joining us today. And please shop for these book titles, The Quiet Ones. Once again, The Quiet Ones. I show What Passes for Answers. They've been my companions all this time in A Natural History of Empire. You can shop for them at www.nationalbookstore.com and on the official NBS store in Shopee and Lazada. You can get 10% off on local books and up to 20% off on imported books when you shop online from September 25 to October 4 only, so add to cart now. There are more virtual events, friends, coming up for the 2020 Philippine Readers and Writers Festival. Check out the complete lineup by visiting www.readersandwritersfestival.com or follow National Bookstore on Facebook, at NBS Alert, and Instagram at National Bookstore. Once again, this has been Devi Paes. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Dom. Thank you, Kael. Thank you, friends, for enlivening our morning and for putting yourself out there and sharing your wonderful work. And I wish you all the best for your next projects to come.
Thank you, Debbie.
Good luck. Good luck. Thank you very much.
Are we done?
I think so.
Okay.
Salamat, Glenn.
Thank
Salamat,
you. Salamat,
Dong.
Debbie. Salamat.
See you again. See you
Thank you.
again. Salamat, salamat. Ingat, ingat
Okay.
kayo. Ingat.
Bye, guys.
Salamat po, Lloyd and National Bookstore. Bye.